So welcome everyone. Our topic tonight, working with personality patterns, also known as the hindrances and defilements in Buddhism. And next week, I'll be talking about the Enneagram, which is the two topics really go well together because the Enneagram is a tool for the spiritual path that really helps us understand our personality patterning more deeply and how that patterning obscures our deeper nature and can working with it can lead us back to aspects of our deeper nature. So what do I mean by personality patterning, and how is this useful on the path? In any meditation, we're being with some object of the practice, and the things that pull us off are patterns in our consciousness. And there have been a number of studies done now. I think there's been a couple that have found that a modern person has between 80 and 90,000 thoughts a day. So 80 to 90,000, that's quite a lot. And the scarier thing than the number is that 80 to 90% of those are repetitive. And they're not just repetitive today, but they're repetitive last week and last month and last year and 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So these are deep grooves in our consciousness that we really see when we meditate. And when we don't, for people who don't meditate, they don't really know or see what the patterns are. So one of the benefits of meditation is that we get to actually see what they are. People don't think of it that way because they just think, oh, it's a distraction. But if we know how to work with it skillfully, that's really what I'm going to talk about tonight, is how do we work with it skillfully, so that we're basically giving ourselves like a software upgrade. When you see those patterns, you are seeing your software program. And that is the software program in Buddhism that we understand leads to suffering. So part of what is happening when we meditate is we're seeing those patterns over and over. Another way of understanding these is that they're the building blocks of the ego self. So most people that I've worked with have between 3 and 5 patterns. I'm talking about people I've worked with for like years, even more than 10 years. 3 to 5 patterns. The contents may change, but the pattern itself is consistent. So we're not talking about a huge number of patterns. And what we're seeing are the grooves, the deep, deep grooves in our consciousness that show us who we are. So psychologically, the ego self is made up of really 3 things mainly. The first is defense mechanisms. I'll get to that in a minute. The second is self-images. So how we see ourselves. I'm the smart person, I'm the dumb person, I'm the athletic person, I'm the clumsy person, I'm the beautiful person, I'm the ugly person, whatever. They're not all positive, but these are images we have of ourselves. And so that's the second thing. And the third is beliefs. So the one that is the most tenacious, and really what we see when we're being pulled off of our meditation object, is mostly our defense mechanisms. And these are the building blocks of the me. So even when you try and not be in the 80 to 90,000 thoughts, even for 1 minute or 2 minutes, we find that we can't do it. And so this is compulsive. So I'm not using the word compulsive as a judgment. I'm using it descriptively. It means that we're trying to do something and we can't not do it. So, just by trying to be with the breath, we see the compulsive thought patterns that are running constantly. So again, the ego self is made up of defense mechanisms, self-images, and beliefs. And the one that is the hardest to let go of, the one that's really tenacious, is defense mechanisms, because these are the things that help us feel safe and protected. And psychologically, the ego self and most of our identity, so these things are also our identity, would be another way to look at it, are formed between the ages of 2 and 10 for the most part, and some of it we come in with, so there's both nature and nurture involved in that. But they are things that we did in our environment so that we could be okay. So for example, say a person has a pattern where they find they're rehearsing conversations all the time. It's like, why am I rehearsing conversations that I'm not going to have, or maybe I am going to have them, but why am I rehearsing when I'm meditating? I mean, it's fine to rehearse a conversation. We're not saying there's anything wrong with these actions, but when we're meditating, what we're seeing is that there's a compulsiveness to them that is part of the building blocks of the ego self. So if somebody has a rehearsing pattern, that might, let's go back to a possible story about that patterning. If somebody, say, had a critical parent, rehearsing conversation was a really good way to avoid that criticism as much as possible. So you could see how the little 5-year-old who doesn't want to be criticized would say it over and over and over again. And there's a comfort. There's a sense I can do something. Because as children, we take responsibility for whatever the parent's doing. If it's them, then we're really in trouble. So we take that on, that I need to do it better or differently. So these are part of what we're seeing in the things that are pulling us off of our meditation object. Now, one of the things in Buddhism is that in Buddhism, historically, a lot of times it was said or thought, well, just ignore those. They're nothing. Don't worry about them. Thoughts are all empty anyway, so just don't bother with them. And I'm not saying at an ultimate level there isn't truth there, and people can see that if they're very, very deep in the path, but that is bypassing. Whenever we're having those thoughts, we're just saying, oh, it's empty and coming back. There's a way that we're not really working with that psychologically. And this is part of what explains some of the scandals of people that are clearly and legitimately realized. I mean, it always amazes me because somebody who, for example, say, slept with their student, a Dharma teacher who has a scandal and sleeps with their student, they probably had that thought millions of times. They're having 80 to 90,000 thoughts a day. How many times did that thought go through their head? And they said, oh, it's just empty. And then they acted out. No, it's not empty. It's showing you something that needs to be worked with, So, and in that case, it's one of the instinctual drives. So this is all part of really working with the material in a robust psychological way that helps us, from a Buddhist standpoint, to really reduce suffering. So, I've got a list of patterns that I'll share later, but say that somebody has an anger pattern, for example, that they find that one of the things that's taking them off is thinking about that thing that person did and how, that person was wrong and, they just, shouldn't have said that, or I didn't deserve it, or whatever. And this is something a person finds themselves going to. Well, what's that about? What's it doing? Well, and I'll talk in a bit about how we can really go deeper with understanding these patterns. If we really feel into an anger pattern, we can feel that it kind of feels good. There's something good about it because there's a self-righteousness to it. It's like, I'm right and they're wrong. And at a surface level, it kind of feels good. If we feel under it, we can feel that actually there is suffering in it. But what it's doing is it's helping us get some power back. Because I can sit here and be angry at you and never say a word and you'll never know, but I'll feel more powerful. So this is, these are all conditioned ways that inside ourselves, we work with situations that are causing some kind of distress in our lives, we go to these different patterns. And when a person, I've worked with literally hundreds, maybe thousands of people now on patterns, and people will sometimes come in when I'm doing a 1 or 2 week retreat with them and say, this pattern really isn't anything. And within 5 or 10 minutes, we can usually find the origins of it, and the person's in tears because they can see, you know what, I needed this as a kid. I needed to be the pleaser, because if I was the pleaser, it was way better for me and I didn't get hit, you know? So these patterns aren't empty. And when we start actually giving them, they're trying to get healed. This is really what I've come to after teaching for almost 20 years now, is that they're calling our attention not to disturb our meditation, but because they're trying to actually, that part of our psyche that got frozen at the time that these things happened, that was too much, is trying to get healed. So how do we work then with the patterns? And a lot of this relates to therapy, internal family systems, and other kinds of therapy. So meditation is a great adjunct. A lot of times I'll have people who I've worked with for a while who come back and they tell me, my therapist really wants to say thank you, because the meditation, part of what the meditation does, just by trying to be with our breath for half an hour, it will show us within minutes what the building blocks of the me are. It'll show us those building blocks and give us a way to start working with this in a skillful way. If we don't tell ourselves this is just empty, or it's nothing, or it's gibberish, if we see it really as, this is what our mind is going to 80 to 90,000 times a day. So clearly there's something in it that is significant. So in Buddhism, these are called the hindrances and defilements. So I like personality patterns better because it's more neutral. And really, when we see these things and we see what they've done for us over not only as a kid, but over the history of our life, they've been protective. So these are defense mechanisms. They feel protective. So again, if somebody is, say, has an anxious pattern, say that they're worrying, they find that their mind is going to worry. Well, anxiousness is a distortion, just like anger is a distortion of strength. Anxiousness is a distortion of curiosity. So I used to have rabbits, and rabbits get eaten by everybody, and they are the ultimate, they'll just start shaking if something is wrong, but they are super curious when they're not afraid. And how does this serve a rabbit? Well, if they are watching everything, they're less likely to get eaten. So this is basically the same, for a person who has an anxious pattern as part of their defense mechanisms. There's something that at some point was helpful about being extra alert, because then I can avoid the bad thing. So this is how the patterns become protective, and they've served us. They have served us when we really can feel, not just know in our heads. These things don't go away just by knowing in our heads. We really need to, the reason why they're tenacious is that until that material has been digested in the heart and in the belly, they're going to be coming back, because usually there's some pain under there. There's some pain underneath the reason that this defense is there. So in Buddhism, as I was saying, we have Buddhist psychology, which was great. For the Buddha to do that 2,600 years ago was really genius. Now with the psychology we have in the last 100 years, it's, we have so much more now that when you combine the two, they become very powerful. So in Buddhism, we have the 5 5 hindrances and 3 defilements. So what's the difference between hindrances and defilements? Hindrances are considered to be more superficial and more situational, circumstantial things. So, for most people, when they start meditating, they can see that some of these things go away pretty quickly. I don't think I've ever met anyone who hasn't been meditating for a year or more who hasn't had significant improvement in their level of happiness and reduction in suffering. So the defilements are considered more core building blocks of our personality. And they're more tenacious. They're more like the building blocks of the ego. So they don't go as easily because part of it is without defense, without these things that feel protective. So what is a defense mechanism? It's an armor, it's a shielding, it's protective, it's going to keep us from harm. That's what these things were originally doing. And without them, as on the spiritual path, we start opening and not being so caught up in our personality patterns, it can feel vulnerable to not have them. Over time, we start knowing ourselves more as our deeper nature. So part of what, why would we even want to work with this? Well, part of it is because these things cause suffering, but another part is that it's blocking us from our deeper nature. So if we're completely identified with the ego self, that obstructs the mystery, the deeper mystery that we are, that we can actually know through our own direct experience. I mean, this is really what the Buddha was pointing to. And I just want to say that I will get to the chat. At some point, I'll look through and answer some of those, but I'm not going to be sort of pinging back and forth right at the moment. So what are then the hindrances and defilements? So the first 3 are both hindrances and defilements. So I'll focus on those. So the first one is desire. And that used to be called greed in the old days, but desire. So we're going off of our meditation object, and the thing that we're going off is something we want. So within this is sometimes fantasizing pattern will be there, where people find they're going off and thinking about their vacation, or, going out to dinner tomorrow night or something like that. So that can be part of it. Envy. So thinking, that my coworker got that promotion and they didn't deserve it and I did. Jealousy, which is a little different, could be relating to, say, a significant other that we think maybe, if we're dating somebody, they're interested in someone else or something like that. So these are all in the zone of desire, but any pattern where we're going off and it's something like, if I could just get that thing, if I could get that job or that partner or that house or that whatever, then my life would be good. I would be solved. That's desire. Problem with desire is that what we find, the ego self is a doing machine. So even when we get the thing that we want, and I'm not saying it's not good to have goals in life. I think it's wonderful to have goals in life and aspire to things. But again, where does it cause suffering? That's really the zone of Buddhism, is to see if we can reduce the suffering we add to the pain of life. So with desire, what happens is when we get the thing that we want, if we aren't really attuned to desire as a pattern, we get the thing and there's happiness for a while, and then that subsides, and now there's another thing. There's always going to be another thing, to the point where it's hard to actually be satisfied. So this is where, if we're not working with desire as a pattern, it kind of just runs perpetually. It's a perpetual motion machine. So the second one is aversion. This used to be called hatred, but hatred's part of it. So aversion is, if I could just get rid of that thing, if I could just get rid of my boss who's always critical, or my neighbor, or my partner, if my partner would just stop doing that one thing, then life would be good, or in the world, things You know, things in the world, the world's never going to be exactly the way we want it. Granted, there's a lot of things to be aversive about right now in the world, but aversion is, if I could just get rid of that thing, then I'd be okay. So included in this is anger. Anger is more hot. So anger is like, I want to yell at that person. I want to, punch them or something. Hatred is cold. It's the cold shoulder. We even have words in our vernacular. Cold shoulder. I'm just going to cut them off. Ghosting someone. Hatred is like, I'm going to freeze them out. And then we have fear-based aversion, where I'm afraid of that thing. So if I could just get rid of it, anxiety is in here. So that's the second pattern, is both a hindrance and defilement, is aversion. The third one, in the hindrance category, it's called sloth and torpor, or sleepiness. In the defilement category, it's called delusion or ignorance. And this is really the primary defilement that we all have, is the turning away from our deeper nature and identifying with the body and the ego self as all we are. So I'll show you this little, since I'm on this topic. So this is our normal perception of reality. So here's me, here's you, here's your computer, here's your garbage can, and it's all separate. And from this perspective, it's true. It's not false. But if I take this away, if I take the veil of the personality of the ego self away, there's a whole deeper reality going on. This is what the Buddha was pointing to. And if I touch my hand down here, where does the finger end and the hand start? I can still feel the finger down here, but at this level, it's not separate. Is this finger and this finger separate from down here? No. So this non-separation, the sense of a deeper reality that goes beyond just the physical level of reality, this is what the Buddha was pointing to. And if we're 100% identified with the body and the personality, we're not going to be able to experience that. And when we know what we are here, that is the peace that passes all understanding. That is the place that can have equanimity in the face of anything that's going on in the world. Doesn't mean we don't take action to make the world better, but there can be a peace even when things aren't going the way we want, and that's the potential. So going back then to delusion and ignorance, this is the hardest defilement to really get in touch with, because sleepiness is one of the main signs of it. Now, a lot of people, I found, again, teaching retreats for 20 years, people come to retreats tired, and I tell them, if you're tired, if you're actually sleep deprived, get some sleep, take a nap, don't come to the sitting, because we can't tell if you actually have this defilement or not, if you're actually tired. So if you're falling asleep when you're not actually tired, that would be a place to start wondering, is this delusion? Because delusion is a falling asleep on ourselves. It's like, how does this show up in life? Well, it's that thing in your life that isn't working, or that conversation that you should have had, that you just are just like, no, I'm just going to pretend that's not there, or it's the doom scrolling, standing in life at the grocery store, looking at texts that have been looked at that are, 9 years old. I mean, why? Why would somebody be looking at that? Just to check out. It's a checking out. It's I need to just like binge watch, Friends for the 10th time because I had such a hard day at work. I just want to go numb and just, not think for a while. And again, I'm not saying we don't need that once in a while, but these are the signs of delusion, where we're falling asleep on ourselves, we're numbing out, we're just kind of checking out of being actually present. And then the last two are just found in the hindrances, and they are restlessness and remorse. So especially body restlessness, we can see, and remorse over things we've done, especially. And the last is doubt. And doubt is the one that I find that people have the hardest time seeing because they believe it, especially. So when it comes to practice, doubt is doubt about oneself, the teacher, or the teachings. And most often people have doubt in themselves. That's the place where it's the most detrimental to one's practice, because people start thinking, well, I've been meditating 10 years and this pattern's still coming up, why is this coming up? It's not doing anything. Or I'm a bad meditator. Everyone around me in the hall is a good meditator, but I'm a bad meditator, or here on this event. So actually seeing doubt as a hindrance is a great way to work with it skillfully. So for all of these, one of the miracles really of what the Buddha was teaching us is that if we see these as a pattern, all of a sudden we're not identified with it anymore. If we're just running it, like say in life, all of this translates to life. Like say somebody has an anger pattern. I'll go back to that. And you're with your partner or your kids and they're doing something you don't like. If we're used to seeing this on the cushion, we can feel when it starts arising, and instead of just acting it out, and now we're going to have regret for what we've done and said that we can't take back, there's the potential to go, okay, my anger pattern's coming up. The minute we see it's a pattern, we're not identified with it anymore. We're not compulsively doing it. So the same thing is true on the cushion when we notice we've gone off the breath, and the breath is a great object because we're going to see our patterns pretty clearly when we're trying to be with just one object like that to the exclusion of everything else. If we start getting to know our software program, okay, I've got an anger program. This is when I feel I've been harmed, or when somebody's judged me, or, we start to really get to know our software program and to see that it's a pattern. So instead of being totally 100% identified with it, we start getting some space from it. And that alone helps us to disidentify and to start thinning this out. So I call this the thinning of the me, the thinning of the me. So as the me thins, we can start actually having tastes of our deeper nature more frequently, and times when we're sitting where we're not just 100% caught up in the thoughts, where there could be periods of a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes where there's actually peace, or there's so many qualities of our deeper nature, especially depending on what practice we're doing, that can arise that are very nourishing to our consciousness. So this is really how we go about the software upgrade. And to really go into the pattern, I recommend using really the Vipassana investigation. So in that, instead of say that pattern's really in someone's face when they're sitting, then the option would be to leave the main object of the breath and to investigate it a little bit, feeling actually what is it like and what's it doing for me. So say the pleasing pattern of somebody, a lot of times I'll notice that people who rehearse conversations that they never have, like conversations of saying they don't like something, maybe something that their partner's doing or whatever, and they never have the conversation. A lot of times people will report to me, what's going on with that? And if they actually feel into it, they realize they're pleasing their partner. It's more important to please the other person than it is to be authentic. And yes, we have to be able to have a give and take with the loved ones in our life. I'm not saying that we always say something, but if somebody, that tends to leak out. If we're really dissatisfied with something in our life, and our way of defending against that is to just always please the other person, that leaks out in other ways, and it's not authentic. So when people get more in touch with what's really there and they see they have a pleasing pattern, then off the cushion, they can see, when do I say yes, even when I mean no? And then I resent the person because I said yes. You know, this is part of what a pleasing pattern does. And when a person feels into it more for themselves, I mean, you are the only one who can really know what the pattern's doing and the origins of it, and to start digesting it in that way. But this is really how we start opening it up so these things can really get digested and we can gain a huge amount of freedom from them. So I think I'll stop there and just take a look at the chat and see if there are any questions here to be answered. So a few people have been talking about their patterns.
Tina 710, there's a question about intrusive thoughts.
Okay. Yes.
Love to know your input about intrusive thoughts and OCD.
Thoughts on intrusive thoughts and OCD. Yeah, this, what I'm talking about would be aside from any kind of clinical diagnosis of OCD, because pretty much 100% of people, unless they're fully enlightened and have no ego self, they're going to have thoughts that are pulling them off the object. And I wouldn't use the word intrusive thoughts for what I'm describing as part of the meditation. This is a normal part of practice to be pulled off of our object. I would say there's virtually no one. And I've been studied by Yale Neuroscience Lab. So, you know, this is not a normal thing for people to have long periods without any thoughts coming in. It's part of us seeing what's going on in our thought patterning off the cushion all day long. So OCD to me is a different kind of situation with a clinical diagnosis of having compulsive thoughts that are repetitive to the point of somebody having functional obstacles in their life. So I would just separate out what I'm talking about here from that, because pretty much everybody has the patterns, and they're showing us what our go-to is for both knowing who we are and also how we deal with difficulties. So, for example, in a family where, say, for example, there was abuse or even a critical parent, there might be 3 kids. One kid is going to mouth off to the parent and fight. One kid's going to be silent and try and flee and be anxious. And one's going to please and try to get mommy or daddy an ice cream to make them feel better. Those are 3 different defense mechanisms in the face of the exact same stimulus. So when we're seeing the patterns that are happening on the cushion, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing our go-to. And how this affects our life, and how does this lead to suffering? Well, say somebody has, I'll get my list out. At my last retreat, I thought, I've been wanting to do this for years. I started making a list of patterns. So what have I not used yet? Planning is pretty much one that everybody has. But what's interesting about planning is I've worked with people with this over the years. There's 3 different kinds of planning based on each of the defilements. So there's the desire planning. I'm planning my next vacation, or I'm planning my weekend. Fun things that are more fun to think about than being with the breath. Then the next kind of planning is aversion. So I'm planning a lot of fear-based planning. So this is where people will try and plan something perfectly so that there's never any mistakes. That's more anxiety-based. And then the third kind of planning, like sometimes people will be sitting planning their grocery list. And like, why? What would that be? Well, that's more delusion-based planning, because it's really the content is really irrelevant. Or even sometimes I've worked with people where they'll hear music sometimes, and I've had different takes from people on when they really explore the music, what's it doing, but one of them is delusion, where it's just keeping them from being present. So let's see, there's more questions. I won't get to all of these, but okay. So this isn't to say that any of these patterns, like planning, is a good thing to be able to do in life. Off the cushion, we need to be able to plan. It's a great skill to have. But what we're seeing in meditation is when anything is pulling us off of our object, what we're seeing is the compulsiveness in it. And the planning, for example, like sometimes I've worked with people who have planning as a pattern. Like I had a student for years who did a lot of my 2-week retreats, and up for the first week, she'd be really great. And then after the first week, her me started getting really thin, and it was like it started coming back and like pulling her attention so strongly, and she would start planning her next retreat. So every retreat she was on, halfway through, she wouldn't be there anymore because she was planning the next retreat. So now she's here and she's not even here, you know? Or people who will plan and plan and plan the same thing over and over, and when they really feel into it, what it's doing is it's just feeding the anxiety. What we're not being with, like all of these are defenses to not be with something that is hard to tolerate. So for example, somebody who's a fear-based planner, it might really be hard to be with the truth of reality that something might go wrong. So instead of going over and over and over 80 to 90,000 times a day, to just accept, you know what, it might not go perfectly. Can I tolerate that? Yeah, you can. And then there's peace. Or if you can't tolerate it, then there's some history. Maybe a perfectionistic parent, or maybe oneself is perfectionist and you're beating yourself up all the time because you don't get it perfect. That's where we start seeing the suffering that the pattern is trying to mask. So let's see, I'll just go back and see if there are any questions.
Interesting question at 7:16, Tina, from Karen Richtenwald.
Yeah, hi, Karen. I can't see you because there's over 300 people here, but nice to see you. Okay, would you recommend setting an intention, whether we're beginning a concentration or using shamatha as a home base to go into Vipassana? Yeah, well, so this is where, thanks for the question, Karen. This gets me to something that I wanted to talk about, which is the 4 categories of meditation that are the main ones being studied in neuroscience right now. And this is really the basis of my teaching, is on these 4 categories. So I'll just name them, and then I'll talk about what each category is doing and then how to use the investigation in each of them. So the first category is heart-based practices. This would include the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, empathetic joy, equanimity, and compassion. So those are the main heart practices. The second category is called focused attention in the neuroscience research. And this is where we're bringing our attention to one object of awareness to the exclusion of everything else. And it really brings the mind stream together and makes a powerful, gives us a powerful awareness. Vipassana, that is the open monitoring category. So in Vipassana, ultimately, we include everything. Whatever arises in our awareness can become the object for however long it's predominant. And in that, we're learning to include more and more things without being reactive. And then the 4th category is called self-transcending. And the practice I teach in this category is called Dzogchen. It's a Tibetan Buddhist practice. It's the pinnacle practice of one of the lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. And in that kind of practice, we're really we're really going for knowing our deeper nature directly. We're cultivating the capacity for that. So it's an advanced practice category that really it's better to work with the other three and get some footing there before doing that. So for each practice, the other three categories become the antidotes. So Karen's question about, should we set an intention to do samatha or go into vipassana? What I recommend is that if we're doing one practice, really do that practice. Because if we're just wandering around all over, we're never really challenging our consciousness to get stronger. So every time we go off of the breath or whatever the object is and we come back, it's like doing a rep with weights. So I'll come back and equate each of these with physical exercise. So 50 years ago, when people started, being told to exercise, basically we were just told exercise, it's all good for you. And it's true. Any exercise you do is better than not exercising. It's 100% true. But then as we got more sophisticated and research came out, we could see that actually, if you combine different kinds of exercise, that's better for your health. So heart practices would be equal to yoga or Pilates because they give us a strong core and they really purify the heart. They purify our relationship to ourselves and others so that our heart doesn't have to shut down. Any legitimate meditation, in my opinion, is going to be helping us get into the present moment in different ways. That's why my meditations are silent, because if you're silent and you have to see what's going on with your consciousness and challenge it, that's a little bit heavier weight, So with the heart practices, what we're challenging is our ability for our heart to be open in any circumstance, which is a big ask. Second category then is the focused attention. That is like weight training because it really brings a power to our consciousness where we can put our attention on an object and stay there. The third category is more like cardio, the vipassana, the open monitoring, because we're going around, we're including everything. There's a lot of activity there, and it's teaching us how to have a consciousness that can flex and adapt with every circumstance. And then the self-transcending category in Dzogchen practice, we're doing all the other three plus one more. So it's more like a boot camp where we're doing different practices for a specific reason. So say we're doing the focused attention where we're bringing our breath back, we're bringing attention to the breath in a really small area. That would be the practice we do, say, for the whole 30 minutes. But say that we just, kept rehashing this conversation over and over and over. And it was just in our face so much that we couldn't really be with the breath. This happens a lot on long retreats where we're meditating for 6 or 8 hours a day. But even at home, it happens. That would be the time to use a little bit of Vipassana to see if we can understand and open up more what is really going on there and digest it a little bit. And then we would come back to the samatha. So that's how we would use the Vipassana with it. We also say we hit some material that was hard for our heart. Like I talked about the pleasing pattern. Maybe somebody has a pleasing pattern and they find themselves rehearsing conversations that they never have, and they feel into that using some Vipassana to investigate, and they realize, I'm just sacrificing myself for others, and it's hurting me, that this is actually something important, and I need to say something, and that might hurt. That might need some heart practices. The person might need to do some loving kindness for themselves or some compassion, and then they would come back to the samatha. So this is where, to me, the best way to go into a meditation, I recommend people do blocks of at least a month of one practice so that you can really let the practice work. If we switch every time it gets hard, it's like lifting a 1-pound weight. We're never really going to develop more capacity because it's too easy. You know, we're leaving the minute it starts getting harder. So that's what I recommend, is staying with the practice, but using the other categories as antidotes to help open up and digest those patterns. So somebody's asking if breath focus meditation. So they're in the samatha practice, we're using the breath in this area between the upper lip and the nostril. So it's a very small area, and it's for a lot of people, it's harder to do. In Vipassana, we can notice the breath at the belly or the chest. It's actually mindfulness of the body in Vipassana. So those are the two different kinds of breath meditation that are done. So someone's asking about the meditation practices and how it helps dealing with what's going on in the world now. And I mean, this is really, I mean, I have a whole talk, and I have a lot of free talks and videos on YouTube, talks on Dharma Seed. I have a talk on practices to be able to stay present with a world in crisis. So I've got a whole talk on that you're welcome to go look at. But each of the four categories helps us in a different way. The heart practices can help us by really, you know, if we feel overwhelmed with what's happening in the world or things that are personally affecting us, that's a great time to do compassion for ourselves or compassion for other beings who are suffering. You know, it's a way that we are bringing a balm to ourselves and to our relationship with others. So the heart practices are really important right now. And the equanimity practice is another practice that I won't get into because it's a little more complicated. The samatha practice of just coming back to the breath in this area. And again, I have free talks on all of this if you don't know that practice. The word samatha means concentration and serenity. And it's such a simple practice. When a person gets good at it, you could be standing in a grocery line or watching the news or something. It's like, just come back here. Just come back here. And it's like a hit of serenity that takes us out of the doom loop. You know? With Vipassana, the open monitoring, what Vipassana is cultivating is the capacity to be able to be present no matter what is arising, or to get better and better at it, or to notice when we're reactive. So in Vipassana, it allows us to go in, like say we're feeling a lot of hatred for a person, maybe our least favorite politician or a group of people, and we don't want to feel hatred, or maybe we're liking it. Well, let's do some Vipassana. Let's let ourselves actually be with that. What's it like? And underneath hatred, what we don't want to feel is that we're powerless. We can't stop our family member from voting for someone we don't want them to. We can't stop one country from dropping a bomb on another. And we don't want to be in touch with that. So we go like this for hours and we suffer. And we think watching more news is going to help. But if we actually feel that, there can be some acceptance, and we're in the present moment then. We're not in a doom loop. That doesn't mean we don't take action to make the world better. But this is where Vipassana helps us, if we go deep enough with it, to actually be with the truth of things. And then in the self-transcending category, when we know ourself as this larger ground of being, that is the ultimate truth that the Buddha was pointing to, that's liberating. And when we know that truth as the ultimate reality, and ultimately we can know that as the reality of what we are as well, there is a peace in that that passes logic. Because there's a mystery that is unfolding, everything that we can't know from our own individual selves. And that is really what allows for the kind of liberation that the Buddha was talking about, because knowing that larger ground makes other things seem smaller within it.